So first of all, I'm going to introduce you to, I hope you're fine. I'm going to introduce you to what we are going to cover. So basically, we are going to do introduction to economics, then demand analysis, supply analysis, price determination, production theory, theory of farm, market structures, national and also national income, money and banking, public finance, inflation, international trade, population and unemployment, economic growth and development, and emerging trends, issues in economics. Most of the units do have that topic at the end. So first of all, we are going to look at the introduction to economics. So first of all, we need to understand what economics is. So I think I gave you something on economics, introduction to economics. So first of all, you need to know that economics is a social science which studies the allocation of scarce resources which have alternative uses among competing and usually limitless wants of a consumer in the society. So that is what you have there. So we are saying that the resources are basically limited. So meaning human needs and human wants, basically you cannot actually be able to meet consecutive. That's why people keep on wanting more and more. So that's why we talk about they're usually limitless wants. They do compete for them in the society. So it is thus concerned with the way people actually apply their knowledge, skills, effort to the gift of nature in order to actually be able to satisfy human in terms of their material wants. So that's why people do business, that's why people work hard, and that's why people use their gift, their talent, their skills, their knowledge, so that they can actually be able to meet their needs. So it is also defined as the study of human beings to strive to satisfy their unlimited wants using limited resources. Remember, these wants are limited and also the resources are limited. So that's why we have got the scramble for these limited resources. So that's why you have got people who have more, people who have less. And most of the time, these resources are basically limited. So we look at the basic concepts of economic, that's the basic economic concept. And that when we're talking about the human wants. So we are now talking about the human wants. So now we look at, like we have got various economics have actually tried to define it different in terms of wealth, in terms of welfare, in terms of scarcity. So in terms of wealth, they're basically talking about by Adam Smith, they're talking about inquiry into nature and causes of wealth, things to do with the definition of self in terms of restriction, in terms of how does the state, how man come into the study. We are talking about the material welfare. We are talking about things to do with the scarcity. And we also need to know what the scarcity is all about. So for that case, we are basically referring to like the concept in terms of the human wants. So these are basic needs that human beings need to function normally. These are basically things to do with food, shelter, clothing, and air. Things like radio, education, watches, things like vehicles are not very basic. So they mean to have they're meant to have an individual, to have to be happy, to be comfortable. So basically, it's like luxurious life, just to have a luxurious life. So for that case, we have got what we call the form utility. So this is created through changing the form of a raw material to finished product. it is usually done through being subjected to manufacturing process. So the finished goods are in a better form for use than the raw materials. Then there is what you call the time utility. So this is carried through warehousing or storage. And then you have what you call possession utility. So this is basically created through trade or exchange. And then you have what you call place utility. So this is basically created through distribution. And also after goods have been produced, they have to be moved to places where they are required for use. Now, for that case, we need to understand what are some of the characteristics of human wants, other than just changing into a form that can be used, other than being stored for a particular period of time, other than having it. That is the exchange, whether you have the purchasing power, and also being able to be distributed or being able to reach to where they are needed. So we are now talking about the characteristics of human wants, and that is so one of it is that they are many, numerous, and basically unlimited. And the other thing is that they continually change with time. They continually change with time and other factors. So they keep on changing. And that's why you talk about things to do with demand and supply. Some are repetitive, e.g., things to do with supper, lunch, and all that. Then ones are also very competitive. So, and then the other characteristics of human wants is that ones are complementary. They're used together. Like, for example, shoe polish and a shoe. Ones are also habitual. That is, they always occur. For example, we are talking about things like toothpaste, things to do with, let's say, perfume. Then we have got ones that are universal, that meaning everybody wants them. So those are basically the characteristics of human wants. Then we have other things like basic wants. So what are some of the characteristics of basic wants? So one can do without them. One can't do. Yeah, that is, you can't do without the basic wants. The other characteristic of basic wants is that they are felt needs. They can't be postponed, and they are satisfied before secondary wants. And for that case, you need to be able to know what are these human wants and what are these basic wants. And from this, you can easily be able to tell that it is very difficult to actually be able to satisfy human wants. So difficulties in satisfying human wants is that although we can say that human wants are there to satisfy man with their life requirements, but it is always possible to have them. To have them. So this is because they are too many, and new ones keep on cropping up, and that's why you're talking about the limitless. And also the resources to satisfy them are never enough. So meaning they're basically limited. And the other thing is that the reason why it is very difficult to actually be able to satisfy human wants is that they are repetitive. And that one means that people will always strive for more resources. And then the other reason why it's very difficult to satisfy human wants is that they continually change with time and other factors like age and gender. Isn't that? So age has got the specific wants, and also gender, they have specific ones. So that's why they keep on changing. And then some are habitual making life unbearable without them. So meaning at times might need them because of habits. And the other thing is that due to scarcity of resources, a problem of deciding which one to satisfy first with the scarce resources always arrive, because at the end of the day, even if you have that limited, it's very difficult to satisfy. So one of the things is that you have to, at the end of the day, you have to get what you can be able to afford. So we are talking about resources like what? Money, which is also scarce. And you see, these are the things that normally determine, it is an item that normally determine whether you can actually be able to afford the resource. So you have got different types of wants. So they are normally classified into two groups. We have got what we call the basic human needs. So these are things one cannot do without. Things to do with the food. They always come. They do always come at the top of the scale of preference. And failure to satisfy them, one can lead to miserable life and even die. And then you have got the secondary human wants. So they are things one cannot do without. One cannot do without. They help one lead a happy, meaningful, and comfortable life. For example, things like TV set, radio, cars, education, things like sodas, and so on. So that means that one must satisfy basic needs before attaining secondary ones. So since the resources to satisfy human wants are scarce, one has to select one on what wants are to be satisfied first, which others can actually be able to wait. So meaning you have to do what you call the priorities. So we have what we call economic resources. These are basically ingredients that are available for providing goods and services in order for one to be able to satisfy human wants. So basically, a resource must be scarce, and you must have money value. You must have what you call the money value. You can see that. So let's talk about the scarcity there. So I think now when you look at from the content that I've given you need to understand, first of all, what are the economic resources? So we already said that these are ingredients that are available for providing goods and services in order to satisfy human wants. And that will mean that a resource must be scarce and have a money value. So meaning it's something that somebody can actually be able to buy in terms of money. In order for one to be able to acquire it, meaning you have to check out some money for you to be able to have the resource. So that now takes us to what are some of the characteristics of economic resources. So one is that they are scarce in relation to their uses. They are scarce in relation to their uses. They must have a monetary value. So meaning they must be purchased in terms using money. Because now we are talking about money economy. And then they must have at least alternative uses. They can have alternative uses, and then they are uneven distributed. So meaning that one takes us back to the scarcity. Then they have utility. They can be combined to produce goods and services. So meaning they can actually be able to be transferable from one place to other. So for that case, that one takes us to types of economic resources. Types of economic resources. So that one that basically classified into two. We have got what we call property resources and what we call human resources. So at times others do classify them into three. That is natural resources, artificial resources, and human resources. So for the natural resources, So that's basically economic resources. We have got property resources and human resources. And of course, nowadays one means that you are talking about things to do with what? Things like land, capital, whereby land is used to describe all the natural resources which are used in the process of production and basically used to yield income. And these resources, which are free gifts of nature, include things to do with agricultural land, forests, mineral deposits, fisheries, and so on. So basically, we are talking about things to do with they're basically fixed, and most of the time we refer to them as fixed assets. So they are held in trust by the government for the citizens. So that's why we are talking about the include things to do with forests, rivers, mountain minerals, and lakes. And then you have got human resources. They are mental or physical efforts offered by people to production in society. So these efforts cannot be separated from their providers. For example, things like teaching, things like health services, things like mechanics, carpentry, engineering. Those are basically skills. And then on the other hand, we have got things to do with the artificial resources, which are basically created by people through various production activities, things to do with machinery, tools, roads, railway, airport, dams, bridges, harbors, things like shops, things like books. So that means that you can say that natural resources refer to anything given by God or nature, such as fertile soil, things to do with rivers, things to do with lakes or mountains. But now when I talk about artificial man-made resources, basically refers to anything created by a man to assist in further production, such as tools, things to do with equipment, things to do with roads and buildings. Now, when you're talking about things to do with cars and choice, if the resources are available and are not basically enough to produce goods and services to satisfy all wants, then they are said to be scarce. So basically, that's what we mean by scarce. So we have basically talk about the scarcity and all that. Choice and opportunity of costs, production possibility and opportunity of cost and all that. So from what I've just said that at times already we have agreed that we have got limited resources and everybody is actually scrambling for the same limited resource so that they can actually be able to satisfy their needs and wants. So if the resources are available, if the resources available are not enough to produce goods and services to satisfy all the wants, then they are said to be scarce. And that one means that individuals and society cannot have all the things that they want. And for that case, resources are limited. Choices have to be made. So many have to look at the priorities. Now, the choice to satisfy one want implies that others have to be forgone. Isn't that? Now, individuals have to make choices. For example, consumers with their limited income and unlimited wants have to choose how they spend their income. Otherwise, if you just spend it based on the just without looking at the priorities and all that, you find yourself actually dying from the definition and actually be able to die or be able to have difficulties in actually surviving. Now, what is the importance of scarcity? Because you can imagine if everybody had money, everybody had everything, what will happen? Then something fun is that, or strange, is that there is importance of having scarcity of these resources. And one of it is that it makes people to work very hard. And the other thing is that it stimulates the usage of available resources. Now, that's why we are talking about something to do with what we call opportunity cost. Now, what is opportunity cost? This all basically refers to the value of benefit expected from the best second alternative. foregone. It refers to the value of benefit expected from the best second alternative foregone. Now, this is basically based on the fact that resources being scarce have competing alternative uses. So that's why you can talk about, if you cannot be able to afford a particular resource, then it means that you have to go for a particular alternative, but that can actually be able to serve the same purpose. If you cannot be able to afford, let's say, a bungalow, you can go to a bed sitter or let's say one bedroom or another. But at the end of the day, you are having what? Shelter. So, but most likely is that all these decisions are based on the fact resources are basically scarce, but we must have what we call a competing alternative. So the choice to satisfy one alternative means that another one is foregone. That's something important there. So the value of the second best foregone alternative is what we call opportunity cost. So what is opportunity cost? Is the second best foregone alternative. Then there is another term called utility. What do you mean by what? Utility. So this is the quality of that commodity that normally satisfies the human wants. Utility. So from there you can look at what do you mean by utility there? Let's see whether we have in the content there. You actually need to know that. You need to know the definition of utility. So this is the quality of that commodity that satisfies human want. We are talking about the benefits. We are talking about the good things that you get from a particular commodity that can actually be able to satisfy the human want. And then you have what you call economics. Economics, you are now talking about the subject, things to do with display. Economy, this is the country, the financial position. Then when I talk about economies, we are referring to the benefits of the large scale. So that means that when you look at, let's say, economies, these are basically the benefits of the large scale. And then we have what we call that is ceteris paribus. So this is the major concept, meaning other factors held what? Constant. So you hear something, other factors held constant. Another word for that one is what? Ceteris paribus. Then you have got Pareto efficiency. So this is a situation where it's a situation in which it is not possible to make someone better off without making someone worse off painfully. That's how it is. That in order for you to make someone better, you have to make someone worse off. And that's why those are some of the economies that we do have. And that's why it is very, very competitive. So meaning someone has to actually be worse for the other one to be better off. Then there's what you call consume. That's why you talk about developing countries, and then you have got developed countries. So that's why you have got other areas that you have got for people selling, let's say, guns and all that. And then the other one actually earn an income from it. And then you are talking about things like Pareto efficiency. That's what we are talking about. This is a situation in which it's not possible to make someone better off without making someone worse off. Then we have got what we call consumer sovereignty. Now, when you talk about consumer sovereignty, this refers to freedom of individuals and households to decide for themselves what they want to buy in a given market. So this is now giving individuals' choice on what they want to buy, and also in a given market. So there's no restrictions for that case. And then you have got what you call production possibility frontier. So frontier, that is same as capacity, or you can call it PPF or PPC. So that one basically provides graphical illustration of problem of scarcity, choice in which basic economic problem. So that one means that the curve will show the country, what a country produces with the existing supply of land, capital, and all those things are basic resources, and also entrepreneurship ability, that's now the skill. So with the limited supply of economics resources of a country, has a wide variety of options and variety of goods and services it can actually be able to produce. And that's why you look at we have got two main branches of economics. And that one, we have got what we call microeconomics, and then we have got what we call macroeconomics. Now, when you're talking about microeconomics, this is basically the study of the smallest economic decisions making units of the society. So when it comes to macroeconomics theory, basically is a branch of economics that studies the behavior of individual decision making, units like consumers, resource owners, business firm, and also individual market, especially now when you're talking about the free market economy. Now, the aim of having microeconomics is basically to explain the determination of prices and quantities of individual goods and services. So that one means that when it comes to microeconomics, it's also considered the impact of government regulation and taxation of what you call individual market. For example, you can talk about it analyzes the forces that determine the prices and quantities of television sold. Now that one means that when it comes to microeconomics, it can actually be able to be considered as the ultimate cellular structure of economics. And that one means that it basically studies individuals in terms of households, farms. Now, most of the time it focuses in the major areas of demand and supply analysis. And we'll be looking at that later on. And also the market equilibrium, consumer theory, and the theory of the farm. The market structure and distribution theory, those are the things that we'll also be looking at. And then we have got the second one, which is macroeconomics. Now, when I talk about microeconomics, we are basically referring to the study of bigger and complex systems. So basically, it studies the behavior of an economy as a whole. Because the micro is basically individuals, the market, individual market, demand and supply analysis, the consumer theory, and so on. But now when it comes to macroeconomics, this one basically studies the behavior of an economy as a whole, whereby it looks at the relationship that is considered between the broad economic aggregates, such as things to do with the national income, employment, things to do with the prices. And that's why when you look at all these, is that economy is aggregated into broadly homogeneous categories. And most of the time is the determinants of the behavior of these aggregates that are normally integrated to provide a model to the entire economy. So that's why you're saying that when it comes to macroeconomics is that it focuses on the economy stabilization. We are talking about the state of the economy, whereby the government policy is used to moderate business cycles and also encourages real economic growth, like things like stimuli, things like taxation, things like the government policies and so on. So that's why I talk about when macroeconomics can become separate topic, we talk about later on. But the key areas of what macroeconomics look at is something to do with the national income, how the economy is growing, things to do with development, things to do with money, things to do with banking, public finance, unemployment, things to do with inflation, things to do with international trade. So these are basically things that do, or the parameters or the aggregates that do affect a country or it as economy as a whole. So, and this one takes us to why would one study economics? What are some of the some of the good things that you can get when you study economics, or the reasons why one would study economics? So one of the reasons is that economics provides the underlying principle of optimum resource allocation, and that's why you can be able to understand how resources have been distributed. Things to do with the individuals, let's say, actually this one enables individual and firms to actually be able to make economically rational decisions. And that's when I'm talking about the reason why we have got let's say the scarce resources. How do you provide, well, how do you get to alternative? And all this is normally determined by how resources have been distributed. And how resources have been distributed will determine on the spending behavior, on how people are going to make choices in terms of the resources, how people are going to prioritize the resources. For example, we can talk about the preparation of budgets, which involves knowledge of demand and elasticity analysis. So the making of price policy decisions draws heavily on the concept of elasticity in economics and the theory of production in economics, which is concerned with the principle of facilitator optimal combination of factors of production. We'll be looking at the factors of production. Maybe you should be able to know what are the factors of production before we proceed. So what are the factors of production? You should be able to ask yourself at this point, because we are now talking about economists. So at this point, you should be able to know the factors of what? Production. Of course, we'll look at it later on, but it is also very important to know the factors of what? Production. So when I'm talking about the factors production, we are referring to things to do with the labor. Those are the primary factors of production: labor, land, capital, and entrepreneurship. Whereby land will refer to natural resources, including the surface of the earth, water, minerals, and other natural elements. And then labor, we are referring to human effort, skills used in production, including both physical and mental work. Then capital, this one basically includes all the tools and equipments, things to do with machinery and infrastructure used in production. And then, of course, entrepreneurship will refer to ability to organize other factors of production, being able to take risk and being able to innovate on how you can actually be able to process and all that. So that is very important when you're talking about the factors of production. And then the reason why people study economics is that it enables individuals and organizations to actually be able to appreciate the constraints imposed by economic environment within which any entity operates. So that's an individual or a firm is more of fully enabled to appreciate the implications of annual budget, considering on how, for example, you can talk about the increased liberation of the economy will affect a particular business entity and economy in general. So for example, as a student of economics, you will be able to appreciate, you guys will be able to appreciate the effects of such economic and the variables, things to do with inflation, what inflation does to an economy, what exchange rate does to an economy, what interest rates, money, supply, and so on. That's very important. The other thing is that you also be able to understand the area of development, economics. Yeah, that is a fundamental concern with the reasons why society do develop and means of accelerating development. So meaning you can actually be able to understand why some society are developing. What are some of the factors that can actually accelerate development? So it is vital for individuals as citizens to actually be able to appreciate the parameters that determine the development process so that they can actually be able to contribute more fully to facilitate and contribute to solving the economic problems that are normally characterized in the society. So that one means that they can actually be able to, once you learn the economics, you can actually be able to know what are the things that can actually be able to catalyze or accelerate development, and what are the reasons why some societies are growing and others are not growing. And the other thing is that economics is also an analytical subject, and it can actually be able to help one develop what we call logical reasoning, which will assist one to actually be able to know how to logically solve some problems. And then it is also examinable and mandatory for students pursuing business courses. That's another thing that anybody who's doing a business course has to do economics. Also, it will also assist students to actually be able to appreciate the effect of economic variables like inflation, exchange rate, interest rate, money, and supply. So maybe we'll look at the methodology of economics. So methodology basically used in studying and applying economics, and can actually be able to be dynamic divided into three. We have what we call positive economics, we have what we call normative economics, and then you have what we call scientific method. So when you're talking about positive scientific method and normative economics method, we are basically referring to like positive economics, basically concerned with what is or how the economic problem facing a specific society are actually solved. So this one deals with with facts using positive statements. For example, Kenya is a member of East African Community, and Uganda is currently Kenya's major trading partner. So these are positive statements. Then you have what we call normative economics, which refers to the part of economics that deals with the value of judgments. So that one means that it deals with what ought to be or how economic problems facing the society should be solved. So most of the time when I talk about normative economics, they do reflect people's moral attitudes. So I now talk about the attitudes how the expression of what a particular individual group thinks ought to be done. The statements such as Uganda to join join the South African Development Community, or upper income classes ought to be taxed heavily. These are basically what we call normative statements. And then you have what we call scientific methods. Now, when it comes to scientific methods, we are basically referring to in a situation whereby economics make use of scientific method to actually be able to develop theories, and inquiry is generally confined to positive questions. So that's what I talk about when I talk about things to do with the logical steps or processes that are normally used to study economic behavior. So that one basically involves social science, things to do with test hypotheses and develop theories. So some of the steps that you can actually be able to use the scientific steps is that there is what we call observation. So meaning identify an economic issue or a problem. For example, why is unemployment rising? The other thing is now to formulate a hypothesis, create a testable prediction. For example, high interest rates cause unemployment to rise. Then now come up with something called testing the hypothesis. The prediction. Now that means that collect data and analyze it using what? Statistics, things to do with surveys, things to do with graphs, and then you make conclusions or interpretations, accept or reject the hypothesis. So that one means that we are now talking about things to do with what? Is the hypothesis supported by what? By the data. And the other thing is now that the next step will be the theory formulation. Develop an economic theory or what? Model. For example, supply and demand theory. For example, you can talk about an example of scientific method in action is that observation. Many small businesses are what? Closing. Hypothesis. A hypothesis can be high taxes reduce the number of small businesses. Testing. That one means we are now talking about things to compare data on tax rates and business closures over the 5 years. Then conclusion can be, if data support the hypothesis, then it becomes part of what? Economic what? Knowledge. So at this point, you should be able to know that when it comes to positive economic, you are talk about factual and testable. For example, rising prices cost reduce what? Consumption. Now, when talk about normative, is basically opinion-based or value judgment. For example, the government should control what? Prices. The scientific method is step-by-step approach to analysis, meaning observe. So you have to do the observation, you have to test the hypothesis, and then you have to make what? Conclusions. So if you have to compare between positive and normative, is that positive economics is descriptive and factual, while when it comes to normative economics is that it's basically prescriptive and opinion-based. Then when it comes to positive economics, it is more of objective, and normative is more of what? Subjective. Positive economics, it can actually be tested or proven, but when it comes to normative, it cannot be tested. For example, you can talk about inflation is what? 8% for positive economics. But now when it comes to normative, it will say inflation should be reduced. So it's more of general. So that's why I'm saying that when it comes to normative economics, it describes what ought to be based on opinions, beliefs, or values. So it looks at things like subjective, value-based, and cannot be proven or true. So that's why I'm saying that, for example, you can talk about education should be free for all, or the rich should pay higher taxes than what? The poor. These are judgmental statements. They reflect personal or societal opinions, but not just what? Facts. But now when it comes to positive economics, this one basically describes how the economy works based on facts, data, observable relationship. For example, things like objective fact-based It is testable, it can be proven. For example, you can talk about an increased taxes will reduce consumer spending because the prices will go up. Unemployment in Kenya is 12%. You can actually be able to back that with data. If the price of maize increases, the demand will what? Decrease. Because now the purchasing power and also people will be looking at what? Alternative. So these are basically the statements that can actually be tested and verified using what? Using evidence. So I think now from there, I'll give you something else on economic systems. Very important, a very interesting topic about economic systems. And that's why I talk about demand and supply, the free market, the capital system, laissez-faire economy, types of economy. It's very interesting. The advantages of free market economy, the disadvantages of free market economy, the features of command economy, advantages of, we are talking about the command or the planned economy, advantages, disadvantages. We look at the mixed economic, the role of the government, and so on. Then from there now we can proceed to demand analysis.